The city was still smoldering when the cameras arrived. Somewhere between the collapsed facade of a bank and the twisted skeleton of an overturned bus, a child was crying, and a woman with mascara running down her cheeks was mouthing the words a Vought publicist had handed her only minutes before. Above them all, framed against a sky so perfectly blue it looked painted, Homelander hovered. His cape drifted in slow, deliberate arcs, catching the light exactly the way the drone operators had rehearsed. He smiled the smile that had sold 1 billion posters. And the world, as it always did, screamed his name. He drank the sound in the way other men drank whiskey. Every syllable of adoration was a small, warm knife slipping between his ribs, reminding him that he was above them, that he had always been above them, that the concept of gravity itself was a courtesy he extended to the ants below. The state's rescue had gone flawlessly. The manufactured villain had died on cue. The blood on his gloves belonged to no one anyone would miss. And that, in his private theology, was the definition of a good day. Then the sky broke. It did not tear the way lightning tears the dark. It unstitched itself, quietly, the way a wound reopens under a bandage no one is watching. Somewhere deep in a Vought laboratory, an unlisted vial of Compound V had been mixed with something older and stranger, something scraped off a meteor no one had permission to touch, and the resulting reaction had begun eating a hole through the walls of reality itself. Homelander felt the pull before he saw it. It reached into his chest as if the universe had grown a hand. The last thing he heard from his own world was applause. The first thing he heard from the next one was a taxi horn. He hung there for a long moment, blinking against a sun that felt subtly wrong, staring down at a skyline he did not recognize. The buildings were taller in strange places, shorter in others, painted in cheerful colors that felt almost cartoonish. Signs blinked in a language his cape was not designed to inspire. Beneath him, an entire city moved with the mechanical calm of any weekday morning. Cars crawled through intersections. Pigeons argued over discarded bread. Somewhere, a bell rang announcing that a bakery had opened for the day. He waited. He waited for the gasp. He waited for the pointing fingers, the phones raised toward the sky, the mothers pulling children closer, the boyfriends whispering that everything would be fine. He waited for the first scream that would confirm he had once again arrived like a god onto a world that had been praying for him without knowing his name. Instead, a man in a gray suit checked his watch and jogged for a bus. A woman on a bicycle rang her little silver bell at a slow driver and rolled past without ever looking up. 2 teenagers in school uniforms argued about a manga chapter. An old man complained loudly to no one in particular that the traffic had gotten worse since the last time a giant crab had wandered in from the coast. Somewhere behind him a siren wailed, not because anyone had noticed the man floating in a red cape and white boots, but because a monster was, apparently, eating a shopping mall 3 districts away. Homelander drifted lower. His shadow slid across the sidewalk. People walked through it without pausing. For the first time since the day he had learned he could kill anyone in the room, Homelander felt something strange happen behind his sternum. It was small. It was quiet. It was almost polite. It was the feeling of being unseen by a species that had, until that morning, existed only to see him. He was in a world where flying heroes were as common as pigeons. He was in a world that had already grown tired of miracles. And somewhere below, in an apartment with a broken air conditioner, a bald man was making a shopping list. The monster came screaming out of the harbor a little after 10 in the morning. It was the size of a cathedral, all wet muscle and yellow teeth, and it had already crushed 2 convenience stores by the time Homelander decided this was his moment. If the people of this ridiculous city refused to look up at a floating god, then he would give them something they could not possibly ignore. He descended like a comet. His heat vision carved through the creature before its next roar could finish forming. He tore off a limb the size of a bus, folded it in half, and drove it back through the beast's chest. When the second monster arrived, drawn by the noise, he split it down the middle with a single supersonic strike. When the third came, he barely slowed down. Buildings rattled. Windows shattered. A rain of black blood fell across 4 city blocks. He landed in the center of the ruined street, chest heaving with theatrical pride, arms half raised, waiting for the sound he had trained his whole life to hear. There was only the soft, embarrassed patter of falling debris. A drone hummed overhead, angled at him with clinical disinterest. A man in a dark suit approached, tablet in hand, flanked by two assistants who did not so much as glance at the mountain of dismembered flesh behind them. The man cleared his throat, tapped his screen, and asked the question that would ring inside Homelander's skull for the rest of his life. "What is your hero rank?" Homelander stared at him. "I'm sorry." "Your rank," the man repeated patiently. "C class." "B class." "Which are you registered under?" "I do not have your registration on file." For a long moment, Homelander could not remember how to speak. He looked at the smoking corpses of 3 creatures that would have flattened a nation in his own world. He looked at the little man with the little tablet who was, apparently, more interested in paperwork than in the god standing in front of him. Then he smiled, slow and terrible, and he explained in a voice as calm as a knife being drawn exactly who he was. The man in the suit blinked. "I have not heard of you." "You have not heard of me," Homelander echoed. "No, sir. If you wish to be recognized as a professional hero in this jurisdiction, you must submit an application to the Hero Association. There is a written examination. There is a physical examination. There is a background check. Unregistered heroism is discouraged. It confuses the citizens." Something behind Homelander's eyes moved. "It confuses the citizens," he repeated softly. The little man nodded, entirely unaware that he was, at that moment, closer to death than anyone on the planet. He handed Homelander a pamphlet. The pamphlet was blue. It had a cartoon fist on the cover. The days that followed were worse. He tried to force recognition through sheer presence, dropping in on public appearances, hovering above televised monster fights, planting himself in the paths of professionals whose names he had never heard. A cyborg with glowing eyes scanned him in a single dismissive sweep and told him his internal energy signature was inefficient. An old man in a martial arts uniform bowed politely, smiled, and walked away as if he had encountered a lost tourist. A silver-haired swordsman in a mirrored coat looked him up and down and told him without cruelty that he was too loud. Lower-ranked heroes, boys still cracking with acne, girls in cheap costumes, did not even flinch when he raised his voice. They asked him if he had brought his registration card. They asked him if he needed directions to the exam hall. One of them offered him half a rice ball. That evening, Homelander sat alone on the roof of a building no one had told him was important, watching a city that had already forgotten his name go about its ordinary, unglamorous, unimpressed life. He was no longer Earth's greatest celebrity. He was an applicant. There is a particular kind of madness that grows inside a man who has been worshipped since birth and is suddenly asked to wait his turn. It does not arrive in a single burst. It seeps in slowly, through the cracks in his smile, through the pauses in his sentences, through the moments when he catches his reflection in a window and does not entirely recognize the face staring back. By the end of his first week in the city, Homelander had stopped sleeping. By the end of his second, he had started hunting. He began with the cyborg. Genos was standing on a rooftop when Homelander found him, watching the horizon with the patient stillness of a machine that had already calculated every possible outcome of the next 10 seconds. Homelander did not bother with words. He came in fast and low, heat vision already burning through the air. The rooftop erupted. Concrete split. Steel groaned. And when the smoke cleared, Genos was still standing, one arm raised, the palm of his hand glowing softly with the residue of an incineration cannon. They fought for nearly an hour. Every strike Homelander threw, Genos matched. Every blast of superheated vision was answered with a beam of blue fire. Every supersonic punch was met with a precisely calibrated counter. Genos did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply observed, adjusted, and responded, the way a scientist responds to an unusually interesting reaction in a test tube. When the fight finally ended, it did not end because either of them had won. It ended because Genos received a call from his master about groceries and politely excused himself. Homelander stood alone in the ruined skyline, breathing hard, bleeding lightly from a cut he did not remember receiving. He told himself the cyborg had been lucky. The next day, he found the swordsman in the mirrored coat. He never landed a single blow. Flashy flash moved the way lightning moves across water, everywhere and nowhere, a suggestion of motion rather than motion itself. Homelander swung at empty air. He fired at after images. He turned in circles, faster and faster, chasing a shadow that was always exactly one heartbeat ahead of him. By the time the swordsman finally paused, he was standing behind Homelander, with his blade resting lightly against the back of his neck. "You are loud," Flash said quietly and slow. "Please stop wasting my time." Then he was gone. Homelander screamed at the empty street until his throat bled. He found the old man on the third day, drinking tea in a small courtyard behind a wooden gate. Bang did not stand up when Homelander crashed through the wall. He simply set down his cup, folded his hands, and waited. When the first punch came, he was no longer in its path. When the second came, he redirected it with 2 fingers, and Homelander's own fist buried itself in a stone lantern. When the third came, the old man stepped inside his guard so gently it felt like a dance, tapped him once in the chest, and sent him tumbling across the garden into a koi pond. "Your power is real," Bang said almost kindly, "but your center is empty. Come back when you have found it." Homelander did not come back. He fought a giant in a leather jacket who threw him through a mountain. He fought a woman with paper talismans who bound his arms to his sides with a whisper. He fought a knight in dark armor who studied his fighting style for 30 seconds and then, calmly, took him apart limb by limb. He fought a driver with shifting weapons who changed forms faster than Homelander could track. Every battle ended the same way. Not with death, not with mercy, with disinterest. He was not the strongest man in this world. He was not the 10th strongest. He was not, if the rumors he began to overhear in noodle shops and train stations were correct, even ranked. The rumors were the worst part. In his own universe, rumors had been weapons he controlled, scripts written by publicists, whispers manufactured to keep the crowd afraid and adoring. Here they wrote themselves. There was a foreigner in the city, they said, a loud man in a cape who kept picking fights with heroes far above his weight class. He never won. He always came back. He was becoming a kind of joke, the way a stray dog that keeps barking at cars becomes a joke. For the first time since he had learned to fly, Homelander had achieved fame in a foreign land. He was famous for losing. Something inside him finally cracked. It did not shatter cleanly the way glass shatters. It broke the way a dam breaks, slow at first. A fine spray of water hissing through the smallest fault line, and then all at once, everything at once, in a roar that could not be taken back. On a gray morning that smelled faintly of rain, Homelander stopped pretending. He stopped smiling. He stopped auditioning for a rank in a world that refused to see him. He rose above the skyline, drew in a breath that trembled with something older than rage, and decided that if this world would not fear him as a hero, it would fear him as a punishment. He tore the roof off a train station first. He did it slowly, so that everyone inside would understand it was deliberate. He wanted them to look up. He wanted them to remember his face. He melted a bridge across the river with a single sweep of his eyes. He punched a crater into the plaza in front of the Hero Association headquarters. He hovered above the wreckage with his arms spread wide, waiting for the sound of a species finally understanding what stood above it. The sound did not come. There was screaming, of course. There were sirens. There were parents pulling children indoors. But it was the wrong kind of noise. It was the noise a city makes when it has done this 100 times before. The noise of trained evacuation routes and rehearsed emergency broadcasts. Of shopkeepers pulling down shutters with the resigned efficiency of people who have priced the cost of new windows into their monthly budgets. No one was worshiping. No one was begging. No one was even particularly surprised. Inside the Hero Association tower, a technician tapped a keyboard and updated a single line in a database. Threat level, Dragon, that was all. No press conference, no emergency address. No trembling world leader begging for mercy on live television. Just a line in a database and a notification sent to every registered hero above a certain rank, and a small red icon added to a map that already had several other small red icons on it. Somewhere in a broadcast studio, an anchor with tired eyes read the update in the same tone he would have used for a weather warning. A new dragon-level threat had appeared in the Western District. Citizens were advised to remain indoors. Response was underway. Homelander watched the broadcast on a shattered screen in a store window. His own face stared back at him from the corner of the report, cropped from a security feed, tagged with a serial number instead of a name. He was not humanity's greatest hero. He was not a fallen angel. He was not a tragic figure whose story would be told for generations. He was a dragon-level threat, one of many, filed neatly between a talking crab and a walking mountain. He was a line item on a calendar of catastrophes so common that the city had built its entire economy around cleaning them up afterward. The worst part was the children. He drifted low over a schoolyard where a class had been rushed indoors, and he heard them through an open window. They were not crying. They were not screaming his name. They were arguing about which hero would come to fight him. A small girl in pigtails insisted it would be the psychic. A boy with a bandage on his knee bet his lunch money on the swordsman. Another child, quieter than the others, said with the calm certainty of a religious truth that if it got really bad, the bald one would show up. Homelander stared at them through the glass. They did not fear him. They were placing bets on him. In his own universe, he had been a god who terrified nations. Here he was a rerun, a predictable segment in a long-running show. His greatest nightmare had crystallized into something so ordinary it hurt to breathe. The world was not afraid of him. It was simply waiting for someone else to take him out. They came for him at dusk. The sky had turned the color of old bronze, and the smoke from the day's destruction hung low over the rooftops. And Homelander was standing in the center of the ruined plaza, like a king who has forgotten there is no throne beneath him. He heard them before he saw them. The soft hiss of a blade being drawn, the mechanical whir of small legs against tile, the whisper of a servo motor recalibrating, the faint, cold weight of a mind he could not see reaching gently into the air around him and beginning, with mild curiosity, to squeeze. Atomic Samurai stepped out of the smoke first, his coat drifting behind him like a slow flag. Homelander lunged. The samurai's blade moved once. It did not cut Homelander. It cut the heat vision itself, splitting the beam cleanly down the middle, sending two harmless bars of red light into the buildings on either side. The samurai stepped forward. His blade moved again. Homelander's cape came apart in perfect ribbons. Another step, another motion, another slice removed from the world. Homelander flew straight up to escape and slammed at full speed into something invisible. The air itself had become a wall. Below him, a small figure in a green dress hovered lazily, hands in the pockets of her coat, her hair drifting around her head like a slow green flame. Tatsumaki did not even look at him at first. She was looking at her nails. When she finally raised her eyes, Homelander felt every bone in his body register the attention as a threat. She flicked her wrist. Homelander went through a skyscraper. She flicked it again. He went through another one. She rolled her shoulder, and a city block's worth of debris rose into the air around him, forming a slow, spinning cage of concrete and steel. She looked bored. She looked mildly annoyed that her evening had been interrupted. She looked at him the way a person looks at an insect that has landed in their soup, and she called him, in a voice that carried across the ruined skyline, weak. That single word did more damage than any punch. Child Emperor arrived next, and he did not fight Homelander so much as solve him. He read his movement patterns within seconds. He predicted his attacks before they left his body. He deployed small mechanical spiders that clung to Homelander's limbs and delivered precisely calibrated shocks each time he attempted to rise. Drive Night came with him, silent and shifting, his body reconfiguring in real time to counter every strategy Homelander tried, until fighting him felt less like combat and more like arguing with a locked door. Above it all, drones streamed the fight to every screen on the planet. That was the part that finished him. In his own world, cameras had been altars. Every angle had been chosen to worship him. Every frame had been color-corrected to make his cape brighter, his teeth whiter, his jaw sharper. Here, the cameras did not love him. They simply recorded. And the world, watching in real time, did not react the way a world is supposed to react to the fall of a god. It laughed. Social media filled with clips of him being flicked through buildings. Someone set the footage to comedic music. Someone else made a compilation of every time he had opened his mouth to make a speech only to be interrupted by an S-class hero mid-sentence. A morning show played a highlight reel between the weather and the sports. An anchor in a bright blue suit smiled into the camera and referred to him, casually, as another dragon-level nuisance, and moved on to a story about a bakery that had reopened after last week's attack. No one used his name. No one asked where he had come from. No one wondered what he had been before he arrived here. He was not a fallen hero. He was not a tragic villain. He was a segment, a running joke that would trend for a day and be forgotten by breakfast. His greatest weapon had never been his strength. It had been his image, carefully cultivated across a lifetime of managed applause. And in a single afternoon in a city that had not even bothered to learn his name, that image had been ground into powder and swept away with the rest of the debris. He was still on his knees when the footsteps arrived. They were not dramatic footsteps. They did not echo. They did not crack the pavement. They were the ordinary, slightly tired footsteps of a man who had walked a long way carrying more than he should. Homelander lifted his head, expecting another hero, another Blade, another impossible woman with impossible eyes. Instead, he saw a short man in a yellow jumpsuit, a red cape draped loosely over his shoulders, a pair of white gloves slightly stained with what looked like soy sauce, and two overstuffed plastic bags of groceries hanging from his hands. The man was bald. His expression was the mild, distracted expression of someone trying to remember whether he had bought eggs. "Sorry I'm late," Saitama said, half to Homelander, half to no one in particular. There was a sale on cabbage. For a long moment, Homelander did not move. He looked at the bald man. He looked at the grocery bags. He looked at the calm, ordinary, almost sleepy face, and something behind his eyes finally, quietly snapped in the other direction. He began to laugh. It started as a chuckle. It grew into a howl. Tears rolled down his face as he stood, blood dripping from his split lip, cape hanging in tatters, and pointed a shaking finger at the man with the cabbage. "This," he screamed, laughter breaking his voice, "this is humanity's greatest hero?" Saitama shrugged. "I don't know about that," he said. "Do you mind hurrying up? The ice cream is going to melt." Something inside Homelander gave way entirely. He unleashed everything. Every ounce of power he had ever cultivated, every shred of strength he had hoarded like a miser hoarding gold, every scrap of speed and heat and force that had made entire governments bend the knee, he poured it out in a single, blinding assault. His heat vision carved twin trenches through the plaza toward the bald man's chest. His fists became a blur of supersonic thunder, each strike aimed to shatter bone, to tear muscle, to crack the very concept of resistance. He moved faster than he had ever moved in his life. He struck harder than he had ever struck. He gave the moment everything he was. Saitama shifted one of the grocery bags to his other hand. The heat vision passed harmlessly by his ear. The punches struck his chest and jaw and stomach without moving him a single centimeter. He did not flinch. He did not sweat. He did not even seem to notice. His eyes were slightly unfocused, in the way of a man mentally calculating whether he had enough coupons left for next week. When the storm finally faltered, when Homelander hung in the air trembling, chest heaving, throat raw from screaming, Saitama tilted his head. "Are you done?" He set the grocery bags down carefully on a piece of broken pavement. He straightened. He drew back one gloved fist. The punch was not fast. It was not slow. It was simply a punch, thrown the way an ordinary man throws an ordinary punch on an ordinary afternoon. It connected with the center of Homelander's chest with a sound so soft it was almost polite. There was no explosion. There was no shockwave. There was only a moment of impossible stillness. And then Homelander was gone from the sky, driven through 3 buildings, a hillside, and half a kilometer of empty field, coming to rest in a shallow crater at the edge of a river he had never seen before. Above the plaza, silence fell. It was not the silence of awe. It was the silence of an audience that had already stopped watching. Saitama picked up his grocery bags, checked the sky as if wondering whether it might rain, and began the long walk home, muttering to himself about whether he had remembered to buy garlic. Somewhere in the far distance, a train pulled into a station. A vendor called out the price of noodles. A child laughed. The battle that was meant to define Homelander forever had ended before his ice cream melted. He did not die. That was, in the end, the cruelest part. He lay in the crater for a long time, staring up at a sky that was slowly turning the color of a bruise. His ribs were broken. His cape was gone. Somewhere in the fall, he had lost one of his boots. He could not remember when. He tried once to rise and his body refused, not out of pain but out of something deeper, something that felt suspiciously like shame. So he stayed. He listened to the river. He listened to the wind. He listened in the far, faint distance to a city that had already moved on. Above him, the dimensional tier began to reopen, a soft red seam stitching itself back into the clouds. He did not look at it right away. He looked instead at the small screen of a discarded phone half buried in the mud beside him, still playing the tail end of an evening news broadcast. The anchor was smiling. The graphic behind her showed a map with a red icon quietly turning gray. The incident in the Western District, she said, had been resolved. Cleanup was underway. Property damage was within acceptable parameters. No S-class heroes had been seriously injured. Citizens were reminded to observe the usual evacuation protocols during the next attack, which forecasters estimated would occur within 72 hours. She did not say his name. She did not show his face. There was no interview. There was no statue. There was no reverent obituary from a trembling world leader. There was a weather report and a segment about a bakery and a preview of tomorrow's traffic. Somewhere in a modest apartment, Saitama was eating leftover curry and had already forgotten what the man in the red cape had looked like. He was thinking mildly about whether he should try a new recipe next week. He was thinking mildly about a sale on radishes. He was not thinking about Homelander at all. He would never think about Homelander again. To him, the fight had been another item on a list of things that had happened between the supermarket and dinner. In his own universe, Homelander had been a name that made presidents sweat. Here, he was not even a memory. He was a filed report. He was a gray icon on a map. The tier widened above him. He rose slowly, painfully into the air. He drifted toward the rift with the careful, uncertain motion of a man who was no longer sure his body belonged to him. As he crossed the threshold, he looked down one last time at the city that had unmade him. The lights were coming on in the windows. A train was crossing a bridge. Somewhere, a child was laughing at something on a screen that had, an hour ago, been showing footage of his defeat and had now moved on to cartoons. He carried something back with him through the rift. It was not fear. Fear he had known. Fear had been the currency of his old life, the tribute he had extracted from every crowd, every camera, every trembling assistant. It was not anger. Anger had been his oldest companion, the warmth in his chest that had kept him moving through a life of manufactured love. It was not hatred. Hatred, at least, would have given him a shape. It was insignificance. Complete, quiet, absolute insignificance. The knowledge that somewhere, in a world that would never think of him again, life had simply continued without pausing to notice he had ever arrived. The knowledge that his greatest punishment had not been defeat. It had not been humiliation. It had not been pain. His greatest punishment had been to discover that a universe could exist in which he did not matter at all. And as the rift closed behind him, that knowledge came home.